Hello again. In this screencast I'm going to show you how to install Instant Indicia. So this is the content management system modified especially for biological recording that gets you going with Indicia really quickly. Before starting, I'll point out that I've already installed myself a copy of the warehouse, and you should either do that or get yourself an account on the test warehouse hosted by the BRC. And I've also got a web server ready set up that I can install Instant Indicia onto. So this could either be a hosted web account, or in my case I've installed XAMPP locally, so I have effectively got a local development copy of a web server running ready to install Instant Indicia onto. So to install Instant Indicia, you're going to need to get access to the download files. And if you go to the Google code site for Indicia and then go to the downloads link, you'll find that the Instant Indicia download is available there. And also have a good look at this document. It's a very comprehensive document on using Instant Indicia, going through the setup and the subsequent usage. So this screencast is just covering one part of that document. I've cheated just to save a few seconds. I've actually already downloaded. If I can pop up the downloads, already downloaded the file. So I'm going to copy the contents of the Instant Indicia download to the clipboard, and I'm going to go into my web server folder, which you might find is if you're running a web server on a hosted account, you've got to use FTP or to access it, but in my case it's just a local directory called htdocs. I'm going to create a new folder. In this case I'm going to call it Instant, but obviously you may want a better name, one that correlates with the website that you're creating. And into that I'm going to paste the contents of the Instant Indicia installer. Okay, that's done. Next step is to actually load up the that web folder, and Instant Indicia will guide us through the installation process. A new tab. Local host is where my local copy of the web server is running from, and the folder I created was called Instant. This is where we should find it, and just clear that. It's taken us straight into a page that is part of the Drupal content management system install process. This is a pretty standard page in Drupal installation, which lets you choose the nature of the Drupal installation that you want to create. So you can either create a vanilla Drupal install here, or you can create the Instant Indicia one, which is what we want to do. Okay. So the first thing is that the installer has given us a warning about something we need to do before we can proceed, and that is to go to the site's default settings file and then copy it to settings.php. Okay, so if we go to the Finder, and we can browse in, I'm using a Mac, obviously Windows Explorer would do the same. Sites default, in there's a file called default.settings. If I just double click to jump in that folder, now I can copy it and paste it and rename it to just settings. Okay, now if we go back to the web browser and reload the page, it will test that we've done everything correctly. We haven't quite finished the job. We haven't set up write permissions on the file, so Drupal can't save its settings. So back to the Finder, and we need to give that file write permissions. This is obviously going to be slightly different on a Windows machine. This is a different way of handling permissions. Okay, back to the web browser, and we'll reload the page, and if with any luck. Okay, we've still got more to do. The site's default files folder is not writable, so we need to make that folder writable. Get the information for that. and change that to read and write. Close, back to the web browser, reload the page. Okay, we've done the initial configuration required to the file system, and we're ready to proceed with the Drupal installation, which initially is standard for Drupal, and subsequently will be we'll see the specialist parts that are to do with Instant Indicia. So what we need to do now is to have a database set up. I'm going to install Drupal and Instant Indicia using the MySQL database at the back end. Now I have MySQL accessible via a tool called PHP MyAdmin, and that's provided by default as part of the XAMPP installation, and many web servers will support the same tool. If you're using a hosted server, you may find that you can't create databases using this tool. You have to use the control panel they provide to do that, but it should be fairly obvious what you're doing is very similar to what I'm going to do now. So I want to create a new database called Instant. So we just create that database. We don't need to create any tables in this database because the Instant Indicia installer, the Drupal installer, will create all the tables it needs. But we do need to create a user account that can connect from the web server to this database. To create the user, we go to the Privileges tab, click the Add New User link, and first of all give our user a username. And because the server we're connecting to is on the local machine, I'm going to use the local host and give that a password. It's not important because this is a development machine for that to be secure, but if it was a live machine it's quite important to create a secure password. There's a very handy generate password button which will create a completely random password for you, which is the most secure way of doing these things. And we also need this user to have access to the database we've just created called Instant. So the radio option there will do exactly what we want. Push the go button, and the new user has been added, and the new user does have access to the Instant database, which is what we want. So back into the Drupal Instant Indicia installer, the database name is simply Instant. The username is web user, and input your password. Now the installer is going to connect to the database to check that connection works, and it's going to start creating the database tables. You can see what it's doing here on the left. Doing some installation and some configuration to do now for Instant Indicia. This first warning will depend on the web server that you're setting up on. If you're setting up on a Windows web server, it tends to be that unless you lock down all the file access, the files can be edited by the web server, but on a Mac it tends to be the other way around. Unless I open up the file access, the web server can't actually change the files. And there's a file here called helper config which must be renamed so that it has somewhere to store settings. So if we go to the Explorer and go and find that file, sites, all modules, iForm, client helpers, and in there is a file called helper config, and we simply need to actually remove the underscore from that to make it helper config. Okay, so we'll continue with the installation. If we reload the page, it would show you that we've actually done that correctly. Now it also tells us that it's made changes to the site's default settings file, and we can remove the write permissions to that file now, which helps to secure this installation. So if we just go back, find our way back up, sites, default, and there's the file. If we double click on that, we'll see it's the settings file there, which it wanted us to remove the write permissions from. So we'll make that read only for everyone. Okay. Again, we can reload and just it will double check that the changes have been made and it's fine. So on with the installation. So we're going to give it a site name. My Garden Records, and we can give it an email address at recording nature in my garden. We can think of a better slogan than that, I'm sure. The next thing we need to do is create an administrator account. So this is an account that can log in and have full rights over the installation. So it's easiest if you call that admin. Obviously, if this is a secure live server, you'd want to give it a secure password. In this particular case, I don't really care, so I don't mind if the password strength is low. The rest of the settings on here we can leave as standard. And now we're on to the next step, to configure Indicia itself, so the Indicia parts of this installation. And there are some options here for connecting to a particular warehouse. We're using a local one, so we can just tick the option. If we were using a different one to one of the options here, you'd have to input the URLs for where the warehouse is. Now back on our warehouse, earlier we created a website registration, and it's called website 2 local recording site. So in the installation here I need to put in the ID 2 and give it the password which I used earlier. So that will allow the warehouse and the Instant Indicia sites to communicate with each other. Next step is to do some configuration to provide API keys, and these are basically passwords that allow Indicia to use various web services. So for example, the Bing Maps, Google Search Maps, Google Search API, which are used for things like resolving postcodes. And this one here called GeoPlanet. Now GeoPlanet is a place name resolver, so if you type in the name of a town, it can tell Indicia where that town is on a world map. If you don't have a key, there is a link here take you to the Yahoo GeoPlanet, and what you're trying to do is get an application ID if you just follow the instructions on this site. I already have one, so if I can remember where I put it in text edit, and I can just copy that to the clipboard and paste it into the box. Now the next thing we need to do is just configure the map. So this is just the default map that's going to be shown when someone enters a record for the first time. So for example, if you were going to be recording in an area on the south coast, so I'm going to zoom into somewhere like that, which will centre the map on Dorset. And I can also choose the spatial or grid reference systems which are available for selection when people input records, so you can choose whether you want to accept GPS coordinates or just British National Grid. There's a few other systems supported here out of the box. It requires a little bit of code to support new systems, but it's pretty a very small amount, so it's certainly feasible to extend this to other places in the world. Okay, so we can now save the Indicia settings page. Congratulations, Instant Indicia has been successfully installed. So we've completed the installation of Instant Indicia. And if we can now visit our new site, it will take us through to my garden records site, and this is ready to configure, ready to set up and add online recording forms to and so on, but that's the subject of the next screencast. So I'll see you then.